Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. I have with me today Emily, who, we already talked for like a half an hour, and I feel like I could talk to you for the next few hours. So I hope everyone's ready for this. But I think that one of the things so far that we've realized is that laughing through all of these weird and awful circumstances is seriously some of the best medicine that's out there. And so, first of all, thank you for the first part of our conversation that will hopefully let people in a little bit to hear, but also for coming on and being willing to share in those awkward moments and scary moments and crazy moments that people don't normally talk about. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. And it's a pleasure to be able to talk about this openly in a way that isn't making it wrong or weird, like everybody is grieving about something, whether it's a loss of a person or just even a decision that you made, right? Like every time we make a decision, there's a little grief about not making the other choice, right?
Right. So let's I guess start at the beginning, because you had mentioned that you sort of had this like bam, 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 bam of all these losses at one time that none of them were expected. And yet you still have, thank God, your father's alive at 92, who you thought sort of was always going to pass away because he had you as a much older father. So let's start there.
Yeah. So, my parents met later in life. My mom was actually going through a second divorce, and my dad had been widowed. And he had my older brother and sister from his previous marriage, and they were teenagers. And it just so happens that, he met my mom, and she was 19 years younger than him. And that was just, they hit it off, and they wanted to get married, and they wanted to have kids, and that was that. So I came along when he was 52, and I have two younger brothers. So I just have this new philosophy, if you want to live forever, just wait as long as humanly possible to have children.
They keep you young.
Will keep you alive. I've got to see what happens. And so he's still with us, and an inspiration to pretty much everyone he comes in contact with. I mean, he's had an amazing life and overcome so much. But all with a wink and a smile and a joke always, So.
And it sounds like from what you described before that he had like a little bit of a dark sense of humor.
Oh, totally. Yeah. One of his favorite jokes, which he's constantly trying to get me to say on stage, which is not, I won't do it for many reasons. But I think it's, I can't remember, one of these famous 60s stand-up comics. And he said, what did Jesus say at the Last Supper? And separate checks for everyone. And he's like, it's a great joke. You should say it. And he's now appropriated it to himself. He's like, it's my joke. And I'm like, no, he didn't write it.
You just tell it to everybody.
80, 90 years, right. Yeah. So anyway, he doesn't really have any scruples about saying things that are like off color or like sort of, some things that people might find offensive, which again, he sort of missed his calling as a stand-up comic, actually.
Yeah.
But he went into, working in finance and working as a stockbroker, and worked until he was 90. And
wow.
Yeah, a few months before he retired, he was actually hospitalized for like a staph infection. And, growing up with a really old dad, he didn't want us to be surprised if one day he just like wasn't there. And so he very morbidly just talked about like, well, who knows how much longer I'm going to be around, which might be why all of my brothers and I have anxiety. But he's still here, and we're glad for that, of course. But You
But
know,
you at
no
least
one's
had
going
it
to
in the
be
back of your head.
right. It's always like, what now? What now?
Right.
When's the other, foot gonna drop, the shoe gonna drop, whatever, maybe foot. Um, anyway, so that sort of was a little like unsettling to me in that part of the year. There had been some other illnesses in my family that were really like seismic and shaking up, um, the foundation. It's an interesting, like our emotional bedrock is really affected when like people close to us have really massive illnesses, even though there's nothing you can do about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we want to try to fix it and heal it, but like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's not our job to do that, and sometimes it's just our job to hold space and be patient. And so that's really a learning too, as you start to like have people that you lose in life. Because my dad was so old, I mean, like I was taken to funerals all the time starting as a kid. Like we would just go to funerals constantly because he had
A lot of
friends
older
who would pass
friends.
away.
Right.
Right, and clients. I mean, he was a stockbroker for 65 years. So like went to a lot of people's funerals.
Right.
And so that has been very normal for me, as far as like I know sort of the rules, right? Like how to behave and how to, go to the wake or don't go to the wake, and go to the funeral for this part and go to the lunch. And, you know, um, there's sort of that expectation. But
Mm-hmm.
a few times in my life, we've had the unfortunate, reality of losing people in a very untimely manner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some like plane crashes and other things that we didn't discuss before this, but like losing family that we were very close to, like whole families that were just sort of gone in one scoop.
Wow.
And so I think experiencing that in my younger years sort of taught me and prepared me for like what recently happened starting in like November 2022. A really amazing person from my middle school, high school, college experience passed away, sort of dropped dead at age 41. And that brought my whole high school community back together. And he was a really lovely person. And so everyone was just like mourning very openly about the loss of that. And what's challenging now is that because I'm a stand-up comic, I really want to talk about it. And I really want to talk about it in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't necessarily do that because not really respectful to my friend's memory, but also I do think that there is like an amount of time that can pass, or an amount of healing that can happen, and then there's an invitation to sort of reflect on that experience, because people are really out of sorts when death is around. Like um, they lose composure, which is why we have all these rituals in
Mm-hmm.
whatever religious background you come from. It's like, this is what happens when you die, because we've got to smooth this over for
Right. Because so
people.
the people that are still here still have to be here.
Right. Yeah, we still have to be here and function on some level. I had a friend after that, and we spoke months later, and she's like, I didn't brush my teeth for like a week because I just couldn't. It was like part of my grief for him. Um, so I get that. I get that
Mm-hmm.
sort of like inability, or sort of going to like, what's the least amount that I can do right now? Because my energy gets depleted. My like spiritual energy sort of goes into the basement when there's a loss,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a cracking. There's a cracking open that happens. Um, so I figured like, oh wow, this is terrible. Like this has to be it. Like these health things and my friend passing away, like three, it's gonna be
You're
over
done.
now.
Right.
I'm
Everything
done.
comes in threes, so you're done for a while.
Right. That was the belief. And that was not true, unfortunately. 2023 was a year where immediately in February, I lost a friend and former castmate of mine who passed away at 36, didn't know that she was ill, and got to see a lot of people who I'd been in a musical with for 3 years. And that sort of reconnected a lot of people in that aspect of my life. A My niece's half sister passed away in a tragic accident. She was 20, like that was the next month. And all while going to open mics and all while, like
Still living
working,
your life.
still living my life and still telling jokes, even though like part of me is like completely like sort of cut off
Mm,
because you don't know necessarily until this stuff happens to you, like how far you can go. Um, and part of my stand up is talking about like real life and talking about stories and a lot of like weaving in storytelling. And I do have some jokes about death and about going to funerals.
I mean, if
But
you can't make it uncomfortable, what kind of stand-up comic are you? Let's be
I don't know.
honest.
I try to avoid just straight up complaining about everything all the time because I just think that we could do a little bit more interesting things than that. But
Right.
um,
But I think that laughing about it though is different than complaining about it because
yes,
when you're bringing other people into the pain with you, it's not like you're sitting here saying we're going to wallow and we're going to sit for a moment. You're really trying to lighten the situation and say, look, we don't have control over everything, and this is my way of controlling it.
yeah, yeah. And I also really think actually that, every time I sort of think back to jokes about deaths that I'm talking about, um, it is like a little smile and a wink and a nod to that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it is me sort of like honoring them in my way because
Mm-hmm.
it's keeping their memory alive in a way that is actually like fun and like brings joy to other people and teaches people about like, oh my God, I should be so grateful for what I have now,
Right.
right? Like the reflection of like people go to comedy shows because they come feeling like crap and they want to feel better. They
Right.
want to see like someone else has it worse than them, or, oh, my life isn't that bad, and
And
or it's
truly,
not
they
that
want to be
complicated.
able to laugh. They want to be able to let it
Yes.
out.
Yes. Yes. You gotta be able to let it out, especially if you go to a wake and you really can't let it out, right? And
Probably not the best time to tell stand-up jokes.
not the best time, not the best time. Um, I think sometimes you got to get through a wake by like get those little like low profile noise canceling headphones and just pretend that you can't hear anything. That is sometimes really good.
That's a good piece
Focus.
of advice I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah, just I'm just gonna meditate or like, hear something
I'm
to
listening
help
to a
me process
spiritual
this.
podcast or something. No, you're listening
Something.
to something else.
Yeah, or nothing.
Right.
Just nothing. It's great. Um, but yeah, I think that the confluence of different behaviors or traditions with death, I find to be very funny because um, because no one's getting it right, right? Like, no one's getting it right, and then emotions are high, and so someone's going to say something that's just not going to land well. So it's also a really great opportunity to forgive and to practice patience and looking at it from a point of view of like, okay, what's the lesson, what's the opportunity here. So you know always I'm looking for the silver lining, not because I'm a Pollyanna, but because I just truly believe that there's always a lesson for us because we're still here.
Right.
And and we get to do this. Um, and that's how a lot of people deal with the stress of loss and
Hmm.
the stress of a limitation, whatever that is. And if that
Hmm.
limitation's death, it's like it's a huge grief because that's it. The finality of it makes us like question everything.
Right.
Right?
And I think that it's something in that moment, like you said with loss, it's sort of this idea that the emotions are so high. I remember, I think before I had a miscarriage, I didn't understand how complex we really were. And
Mm,
afterwards, I had always heard obviously the stages of grief, and there's anger, and there's the upset, there's the questioning and all that, but at the same time, I never understood that you could have them all at one time, number 1, but also to feel 2 diabolically opposed emotions at the same time, where you could literally be in the depths of grief, sobbing hysterically, and the slightest thing is gonna make you start laughing hysterically, and it feels so awkward, and it feels so weird, and it feels so out of place, but at the same time, to be able to release whatever that emotion is, however you can release it, is so powerful.
yes, it is. It is powerful because um, grief is grief is a really amazing teacher,
Mhm,
right? Like it really expands us. It really cracks us open because it makes it so that you can sort of shrink and get hard and, like not grow, but it is an invitation for transformation for the
mhm,
people who are alive.
mhm,
And especially with miscarriages and all sorts of like fertility loss, right? Like there's um, so much grief because of what could have been, right? Like
mhm,
what might have been. And as though I haven't experienced that myself, that I know of, my I have multiple friends who have had stillbirths and who have had multiple miscarriages, and um, just knowing, I mean, I'm so sorry, um, because that changed them forever, like
right.
just totally. And the loss of a child, even if that child is in their 30s, if the child dies before the parent, it's just a really huge seismic loss because it feels unnatural, like it
Right.
feels out of step with how it should be. But
But there is
that's
no
all
how it should be, that's the weird part.
exactly,
It feels,
exactly
you're right, it feels so unnatural. Parents are supposed to pass away before their children, but at the same time, says who? Like,
right,
people, death is a part of life, and
right.
it's something that we can never wrap our minds around. We have no idea what is in the world to come. We have no idea what is out there after we're not here on earth. But
Yeah,
at the same time, that's sort of like the unsettling part of it, and but it's also the grounding part of it. Like you said, it's such a good teacher because then it makes you look at what you have here, and it either can ground you and say, "I'm so appreciative of the things that I have and the lessons I've been taught and how I can then pass that on to other people," or it does the exact opposite and it makes you feel like, "Why am I still here?"
yeah, yeah. And the I think that's been the big illuminator. I think it's very easy for people to be in victimhood around grief, right?
Mhm.
Like very easy. Um, and I think when you're first experiencing grief, when you're like a grief rookie, like there's a lot of victimhood. There's a lot of like, woe is me, like this bad thing happened to me. And then when you sort of go beyond that and we sort of get away from this like hero victim mindset, which is so pervasive in our culture, like then you're going to like this other level of being,
Mhm.
which is where actually like the hologram of emotions are allowed and necessary because how it should be is like everyone should be happy all the time, la la la. Like, that's like
Right.
not real.
Nope.
And it's not the human experience. The human experience is, it's like a spring day in New England. Like first it's 30 degrees and then it's sunny and then there's a hailstorm and then
Right.
and then there's a hurricane and an earthquake and then it's
Right.
sunny again and now it snowed. Like it's just
It's all
um
over the place, and that's okay.
yeah, it's okay. And like the more you can, it's better than okay. Like it's amazing.
Right.
And the more that we can like just lean into the messiness of our human existence, like the stronger we are and the more resilient we are, and not resilient to like, sort of spackle over ourselves later, not to like that mask is gone. It's cracked, it's done, it's in the dustbin from however many years ago, you know?
Right.
Um, so then we get to look at it like, wow, what a blessing,
Right.
and I will say, doing stand up, even if you're not coming from a funeral to do a gig, um, there is oftentimes, and with a lot of other female comics, especially, um, who I've spoken with and work with, uh, there's this feeling of a hangover the next day. Like, no matter how great you think you did, like how great or crappy you think you did, which is so useful to judge yourself,
Yep.
um, there's this sort of emotional dip the
Hmm.
next day. And so the work is not to be led around by what's happening to you. The work is to engage with what is, and to be grateful, and to always practice the gratitude of it, even if it's a shit sandwich,
Right.
like, and sometimes it's going to be because that's just what it is to be a human.
Yep. It's so interesting that you say that, not the shit sandwich part, but the hangover part, because when I first, after having the miscarriage, I went through this program called Heal, where the therapist who was in charge of the program, it was essentially like AA for people who have gone through pregnancy loss. But you weren't allowed to go in and out of meetings. You basically were there for 7 weeks, and you got to know your cohorts. And
Mhm.
there we still text with each other now, and I love that because it's something that we can really appreciate what the other people are going through. Anyway, so what he said in the very first week stuck with me, and he said, every single week, the day after your meeting, we are going to all experience some sort of emotional hangover. And he
Mm,
used that phrase, and I didn't understand what he meant. And even if you weren't necessarily sharing something that week, you were still experiencing someone else's deep grief and deep loss, and you were still experiencing that low. And the next day, you really did. It was like right on time every single week for 7 weeks. That full 24 hours later felt like you were hit by a truck, felt like you didn't want to get out of bed. And then once you got through that, it was like, I needed that. I actually
yeah,
needed that time. My body was telling me, appreciate the grief, appreciate the sadness, and now look at what's beyond that.
yeah, yeah. And the getting beyond that part, like, I I love Melanie Beattie, and Codependent No More, and that sort of approach to looking at things, especially with relationships, which is very useful when we're dealing with grief and death and loss, because
Hmm.
the codependent, like, oh, all these stories about how it should be, and holding on to those attachments, right? Um, there's a really great book that I love to read often. It's a daily mantra. It's like 365, 366. I learned there was a leap year this year. Um, she included it. Good for her.
Nice.
Uh, it's called The Language of Letting Go. And it's really about all of, again, the kaleidoscope of emotions, with this coming to terms with ourselves,
Hmm.
right? Like facing ourselves, and caring for ourselves, and caring on a very deep level, because we have so little control over so many things,
Right.
like we just really don't.
Right.
And that's really difficult to accept. But when we do, we go, oh yeah, I needed that. I had to sort of go through the spiritual fire of rebirth,
Right.
you know and we're doing this on the day of the eclipse, which, like, this is a huge time of letting go energetically, and we've just witnessed that in a very mighty way here, and
Hmm.
also a very, like, ordinary way. I sat in a field and looked with my little glasses on, and I said it to my father-in-law, my husband, this is so interesting because we know exactly what it's going to look like.
But it's not a surprise. We've
It's
seen
not a
eclipses
surprise.
before.
Right, we've seen them before. And I'm like, oh, so what? Except that it's so special. Like it's so fun to like watch it as it unfolds and as it happens. And so spending that time really in the present, right? And witnessing other people's stories
Mhm.
and allowing them to process as they do, which might be really differently than the way you process loss, like um, I think it also brings up all these questions about like how we approach like um, bodies and how we approach like are we going to have an open casket, are you going to get cremated, are you going to be burned on a pyre somewhere like and floated down a river, are you going to be turned into a tree, like so maybe there's an idea of that, but that might not also be able to go into fruition later. And the people at Harvard who like donated their bodies to science and they're like being sold on the black market, so like we don't know. Like
That's
we
my
don't know.
favorite ride at Disneyland. The people that listen know I'm a huge Disney aficionado, for lack of a better term. Um, and in Pirates of the Caribbean and Disneyland, there is actually a real human skull in the ride. And people don't usually think of like they're going into a ride being like, someone donated their body to Disney. Here, have my head. Why not?
Enjoy.
Right?
I'll
But
I'll be in this ride forever.
I'm just gonna hang out in the Pirates ride. I'm in the bed. I'm good. And it's so funny because it's not something like you look at it and you just think it's it belongs there because they're all skeletons, but most of them are fake. And then you like when you really process it, you're like, oh my God, I'm in the same room as a person. Like that was a live person at one point. Which is
Mm,
also a really interesting way to think about hospitals. I remember as a kid, I would always, I had those superstitions where when you drive by a graveyard, you hold your breath, or
mm,
when you see a black cat, you like, I don't know, I love black cats, so I forget what you're supposed to do, but like if I could have all the black cats, I would to help save them from whatever
yeah.
weird things people do. Anyway, but I remember going in for to deliver my first child, and you're not thinking about the fact that there's people literally taking their last breath in the same building that you're bringing someone into the world. Or when I went in
Mhm.
for the when I had the miscarriage, I was in the hospital for 2 days. And in that moment, I think that's when it hit me where I was hearing every time a baby was born, there was like this lullaby music almost to be like, yay, a baby's here. And I'm sitting there going, I hate all of you right now because I just
Mm,
lost the child that I was carrying. And you're
mm,
celebrating life, and all I want to do is crawl into a ball and just never come out. So it's
yeah.
it's such a weird it's a weird way of looking at it, but death literally is everywhere. And it's something that we need to talk about, we need to face, we need to have not thrown in our face, but like a safe place to say whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, it's all there. It's all normal, it's all okay, it's all relative, and you'll get to that point where you can start thriving again.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
If you let yourself process it through, because um, again, the letting go is part of that, right? And
Right.
like the letting go is the processing, because like you can go and you have to feel all those emotions and the anger and the rage and the violence, like there is that's part of it,
Right.
um but then also uh it's very normal to be sad. Like it's a very normal feeling and it's
Right.
okay. No one's hurt by you being sad,
Right.
like great. Um, and I think that's important to allow allow people to have space for their emotions. And in some ways, in like previous parts of culture, like the Victorian period where like, Queen Victoria like mourned forever and ever, and wore black until she died, right? Like there was at least a visual language to sort of like help people go, oh, that person's going through something.
Hmm.
Give them a wide berth, you
Right.
know? And if you have a miscarriage and you're coming home to a family, right? Like coming home to another kid, or if you, you know, if you're going to a funeral and then going to a comedy show, like there's a lot of dichotomy there, right?
Right.
Like there's a cognitive dissonance. And so at some point, there's going to be a need to express,
Right.
like to really express and to make space for yourself and to
Right.
be giving and generous to yourself. Because the other thing about grief is that we don't know when it's going to happen. Like, it
Nope.
just keeps coming. It's the gift that keeps on giving,
Yep.
like,
And that's the funny part. With every trigger that I find, like I'll be out and about, I'm totally fine. Like I'm not thinking about anything specific or in any way, and it just smacks you in the face. And that's okay. And I think when you can develop the tools to understand how to process that moment, whether that is breathing techniques or listening to calming music or finding someone to talk to in that moment, whatever you need, it's all okay.
mm-hmm. Yeah, it is all okay. Um, and not making yourself wrong for having to do whatever it is that you have to do.
Right.
Um, it goes beyond coping.
Hmm.
I think that's something that bothers me about like grief is that
Yeah.
people are like, oh, she can't cope, or like this person can't cope. I'm like, well, what do you mean coping? Like just saying that it didn't matter
Right.
and
Putting
that
the
you're
mask on and
like,
saying like, I'm fine.
yeah, I'm fine. Everything's fine.
Right.
Like um you might have to do that for a little while to just get through whatever it is. And I have certainly done that in my life. I have just put the mask on and been like, yes, it's sad, okay. And then later been like a total mess. Um, that's one way. Not, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying it's the best idea.
No, but I think hitting on the point that saying that somebody else isn't coping, like there should be no
Right,
judgment in it. However, they're working through it, that's how they're going to work through it.
right. And that's truly none of anyone's business,
Right.
right?
And
And
to just
this sort
hold
of
space.
speaking to, I think a lot of times our society really wants to put the bridle on women's emotions and sort of tell us when to feel what and how to behave.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting how often I have heard or sort of been like, well, she's upset too long or this or that. And then it's not necessarily coming from a man either. Uh, but the judgment is not helpful.
Right.
And the sort of rushing other people through their process is pretty disrespectful. So, um, yeah, I think that, I should probably do some comedy about that. I like to do comedy about things that I like to change,
By all
like things
means.
things we can work on. So it might just be, yeah, just stay in your lane, and
Right.
whatever that, you know, nobody is walking in your shoes, and yet everyone has had grief, right?
Right.
Like everyone will. We don't get out of this life avoiding it because we love people.
Right. And the connection that you have with each other is ironically the thing that then brings the grief, but it's also the thing that can bring you the most joy
Yes,
and to not avoid it.
absolutely. No, well, what we resist persists.
Right.
So,
Right. It's true. I swear I could talk to you for hours. And if anybody wants to, we'll certainly talk at a different time and we'll continue this conversation. But if people want to find you, I know obviously you have a fantastic stand-up routine from
thank
everything
you.
we've talked about. And you coach also, right?
Yes, yes, I'm a life coach, and I uh, I left a career in theater to start my own coaching business in 2021. Um, and then the comedy actually came after that in 2022. So it's all sort of happening at the same time, but
Right.
like everything else.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and grief is a lot of, it's a piece. It's a piece about what we sort of uncover because it's really about transformation whether it's love or leaving a job or, getting honest with yourself about who you are, deciding what you're going to do as your next creative endeavor. I have a lot of different topics that I do like to coach on, but right now it's very love focused. It's very branching into a new genre as the wing woman. So I love that. It's
That's
very fun.
amazing. Well, so where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Emily Taradash Coaching, and you can find me online at emilytaradash.com. You can also find me on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. So
All
wherever
the
you want to find me,
socials.
I'm there.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate the honest and open conversation. I appreciate the laughter. And I'm so glad that you found me.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's conversation, please leave me a review and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.